But for those who don't, I am the senior curator of Critical Distance, a website which is devoted to highlighting significant works of games criticism, analysis, and commentary. I say significant as opposed to the best or most important, because I feel like those sorts of qualitative statements are not actually applicable to what we're doing. The site was founded in 2009 by my colleague Ben Abraham, whom most of you saw speak earlier, and it was handed over to me in 2011, and I've been nominally in charge of it since. A couple weeks ago, we also launched a successful crowdfunding campaign through Patreon, and so thank you for all the patrons that we have with us here today and who are joining us over the stream. It's been tremendously successful, and wow, I can't process it. Anyway, to get back on the subject. Thank you. To get back on the subject, however, most of what I want to talk about today deals with the transition in focus from Critical Distance when Ben was doing it and when I took over in 2011. So what exactly has changed? I love that we're still in rapture, by the way, despite all the time that has changed. What exactly has changed in the intervening years since the founding of Critical Distance in 2011? I'm sorry, 2009. When Ben launched it in 2009, the question to which the site was an answer was, where is all the video game criticism? I think that by 2014, I think we can say with confidence that it's here, it's all around us, it's very literally in this room. So we now exist in a space that is teeming with critical thinkers. And I would assert that generally, whether the impression they formed is good or bad, most average players who engage with game news and discussion online know that we exist in some capacity. But there are still two big issues, and they're basically the same issues that we had 5 years ago, like who is getting paid and getting seen for their work. And unfortunately, the current answer to both of those questions is still overwhelmingly middle-class, straight, white, cisgender men. This extends a lot further than the consumer-oriented press. This affects us as well. It's reflected in how we share amongst ourselves, and Twitter, which is such a significant platform for a lot of us. And it includes projects like Critical Distance, as well as more recently sites like Good Games Writing and the Games Journalism Prize. So it's an endemic problem. And even though Critical Distance is strictly non-commercial, there's been only one instance in our entire history where we reached equal numbers of men and women represented in our This Week in Video Game Blogging feature. And that was on December 2nd, 2012, the week that Philomena's One Reason Why hashtag exploded onto Twitter. So it took an event of that magnitude to even reach equal numbers of men and women in our roundup, and it hasn't been repeated since. There's only been one other occasion where women came anywhere close to that level of representation on our site, and that was a year ago, actually almost to the day, where I curated a special all-women edition of the Roundup for Women's History Month. No one saw it coming. Oh, I'm sorry. So, like Anil Dash, oh my gosh, it's going all over the place. Like Anil Dash, I kept what I was doing on the down low at the time. I justified this by saying that I knew the sort of fallout that we would get from it if I were to make my intentions apparent about doing an all-women roundup. I didn't want to deal with a bunch of supposedly grown-up men telling me that I was being the real sexist, or that This Week in Video Game Blogging should be a meritocracy. I wasn't interested in answering those assertions or dismantling those arguments. Besides which, I believe that if I simply linked to a bunch of women writers without comment, our readers' ability to either perceive or fail to perceive what was going on would speak volumes more than if I were to be forthright about it. Now, since that edition of the Roundup went live, I've had a change of heart about that. Or rather, I decided to be more consistent with what my heart was already telling me. I want to be more transparent about what it is that we do at Critical Distance, regardless of whether it's for a special event like this one was, or as part of our overall philosophy of curation. So now we come to the title of this talk, which I spoiled earlier. Curators are class enemies. And I apologize for the bad quality of the image here, but this slide comes from my favorite talk from Indiecade in 2012, wherein Johan Grensfartner, who's one of the founders of Monochrome, advanced the idea of using games as a radical intervention on politics and consumerism. And this slide here didn't have too much to do directly with his talk, but it was to underscore the general point, which was this Marxist kind of like bent on disruption that he was talking about. When you curate, no matter what that curation is, you are imposing a point of view. And if the point of view is to establish what is good or exceptional within your field, you should question how or why someone, and that someone might be you, is arriving at that value judgment, because no one does that in a vacuum. Which arrives at my next point, which is, this account is great, by the way. How do we square what we do with the problems that curation poses? Because I think that curation is a natural byproduct of what critical distance does by highlighting certain articles each week and by necessity not highlighting certain others. But I think we can resist the idea of necessarily creating a canon with the links that we promote. Rather, I approach critical distance as being in a position to offer an alternative to the canon already being promoted by hegemonic power structures, things like popular websites, mainstream developers, well-financed institutions, none of which I would consider critical distance all on its own. And I realize all this sounds quite nebulous, but in practice it's actually not that difficult. There are really only 3 major things that I take into consideration when I'm going through our long list each week. They aren't hard and fast rubrics, but I find them to be important guidelines. They help critical distance remain not just consistent in its priorities, but to continue to refine those priorities over time. The first of those considerations is acknowledge how your bias limits you as a curator. Now, Ben and I both come from a certain tradition of academia, as do several of our contributors, both past and present. That on its own has a potential to profoundly influence the kind of things that we're likely to gravitate towards and to feature. It also comes with certain class and race biases, because those two are inscribed in academic traditions. On top of that, both Ben and I are white, and again, so are the majority of our contributors, and that is a huge problem that we are attempting to rectify as we speak. So the fact that over the history of critical distance, only a small percentage of our contributors have been anything but, whenever possible, it's important that we correct for that and do so consistently going forward. It also means that if there's a certain topic or theme for which we are woefully unsuited, we need to recognize when to step the hell out of the way and let someone else speak. The second consideration is the works that you reference are not to be understood in terms of absolutes, but as being in conversation with pieces to either side of them. This goes back to refusing to treat critical distance as a creator of canon, but rather as a custodian of dialogue. We can approach curation as revealing a conversation that is already taking place, even if the individual writers you're referencing might not be in touch with each other or realize that they are actually in conversation with each other. It's not really about creating a definitive document. Rather, it's about creating the document that is most interesting or relevant at that point in time, something which offers insight or subverts our understanding or expands our sensitivity about a subject. In a given week, critical distance can cover upwards of a dozen disparate topics, sometimes from over 50 writers. If it sounds chaotic, that's because it is, but we can tease out continuities which form discourses on games as a whole. That's why, especially going forward, like I said earlier, I intend critical distance to avoid language like best or comprehensive when we curate. This is not about pitting writers against each other, but revealing how they complement each other. Lastly, the third consideration is, I strongly believe that when you are empowered with a certain amount of reach and influence, that comes with the responsibility to protect and uplift those who yet don't. This, I think, is the spirit of what Anil Dash was trying to do when he was only retweeting Women for a year, and how other individuals and organizations have sought to signal boost marginalized voices. The danger here is in presuming that this is all that is required of us. On the contrary, what I believe critical distance should be in the business of is empowering voices to move from the periphery of the conversation into the main body of the discourse. To this end, we try to do 2 things. First, we create a safer space. Not a safe space, because that's a check we can't cash, but a space which is sensitive to the concerns of marginalized participants and will, whenever possible, adapt to accommodate. So, for instance, we will not link to any material that contains hate speech or is abusive toward an individual or group. If we must link to something volatile for the sake of context, or if we are referencing something that deals with a triggering subject matter, it will absolutely be bracketed with content warnings. Second, whenever possible, we want to promote the work and subject matter of underrepresented individuals, and do so not as an occasional nod, but as an integral component of the site. This is stuff that we're still working on, and I dare say it's going to be a continual process. It does not mean we will never consider articles from a major writer or publication, but it might mean, for instance, that we won't link to the same white guy 4 times a month. And if you're going to send us an opinion piece about BioShock Infinite, it had better be really original. So this is our vision for Critical Distance. It's ongoing, and we hope to continue building it and to continue making it into a hub for games writing and a valuable resource for everyone to come and share and benefit from, and I hope you'll join us in that. Thank you.